Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa azwajihi wa zurriyyatihi ajma'in. We are continuing our reading of Alamma Iqbal's collection of his lectures, Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. And today we are going to start from here. This is why. But I want to go just a bit back, just to keep the continuity of the discussion. So in the previous paragraph, he had said, in fact, this mysterious swing and impulse of the universe, this noiseless swim of time, which appears to us human beings as the movement of day and night. So the main thing here is, and obviously Iqbal has been quoting, as we saw the last time, heavily from the Quran. But as we saw, his thrust of his argument here is, in fact, contrary to what the Quran is saying, because the Quran, all the verses he has quoted so far, their emphasis on the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his power. Alamma Iqbal, on the other hand, here is more focused on something which is the nature of being, or the nature of reality as such. So, in fact, this mysterious swing and impulse of the universe, this noiseless swim of the time, which appears to us human beings as the movement of day and night, is regarded by the Quran as one of the greatest signs of God. But the main thing is, why it is one of the greatest signs of the God? Because it manifests the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is not what Iqbal is getting at. And he's more focused on the product and not the producer so far. And as we will see that he needs that to build up to the argument he is building up. That is showing that the spirit of the modern world is the spirit of Islam and so forth. And as we saw in his enthusiasm to show precisely these, he has been misinterpreting the Quran, Quranic verses, and at times we saw that he has been, we hope that it wasn't genuine. I mean, it wasn't intentional, but he has been leaving out parts of the verses he quoted which didn't suit his meaning. He has been leaving them out. And that's the hallmark of, at least for the first few chapters of these lectures. Anyway, and now he goes on to quote a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we'll see how he's trying to interpret this hadith in a way that will fit his narrative here, the narrative of the focus on the product, the nature, and its mysteriousness and its variety and all that. And obviously Quran also emphasize that, but the focus of Quran is to show the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the other hand, Iqbal's focus is nature in itself, and we'll see why that is the case in a minute. So, in fact, this mysterious swing and impulse of the universe, this noiseless swim of time, which appears to us human beings as the movement of day and night, is regarded by the Quran as one of the greatest signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he quoted this ayah. We looked at it last time. God calls it Surah Fatir. Or is no, not Surah Fatir, but anyway, God calls it the day and night to take their turn. So it's the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Verily, in this is teaching for men of insight. This is in this there's a lesson for people of insight, ulul albab. But what are the lessons? That's the main thing. But as we saw last time, the Quranic lesson is the power, absolute power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and immensity of His subhanahu wa ta'ala power, and absoluteness of His will. But obviously Alamma Iqbal doesn't deny that, but that's not his focus here. Anyway, let's. So this is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Don't vilify time, for time is God." Well, this hadith has many versions in the collection of our hadith. This apparently is from Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal's Musnad. The more common version is La tasubbu ad-dahr, inna ad-dahra ana. Whatever the version may be, first thing is, time here is ad-dahr. And ad-dahr in Arabic is not the ordinary time, at least. Ordinary word for time is zaman. So ad-dahr is more like the passage of time, the changes which happen in the nature. Now, before we try to understand this hadith, okay, let's read Alamma Iqbal's spin on this hadith anyway. First, this is why the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't vilify time, for time is God. And this immensity of time and space. See, the immensity of time and space, that's what is his focus. On the other hand, as we'll see, the focus of even this hadith is the immensity of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This immensity of time and space carries in it the promise of a complete subjugation by man. Now, this is totally because he's trying to connect this to the modernist, humanist project of establishing human power over the nature. So somehow he's gleaning, or somehow he is inferring from these ayat and this hadith that that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or Quran is calling for, subjugation by man. Because he's saying and this immensity of time and space carries in it the promise of a complete subjugation by man. there's no such promise. That's the actually modern Iblisi promise, is to replace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the sovereignty of man, as a collection of individuals or as a species. And Islam obviously totally rejects that. But that's what, so if we can prove that that's Islam's project as well, then the basic affinity with the modern science and technology and humanism will be proven. And that's what Iqbal is trying to do with. And this immensity of time and space carries in it the promise of a complete subjugation by man, whose duty, so this the duty of man is to reflect on the signs of God. Yes. Reflect on the signs of God and realize the absolute power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and subjugate His will to that power. That's the Quran saying. But Alamma Iqbal is saying that discover the means of realizing the conquest of nature as an actual fact. So this is total distortion of what Quran says, and this is the basic of Islamic modernism, of whose one of its champion Alamma Iqbal is, although not a very self-consistent one, and also at least partially his poetry rejects this very project. So that's what gives Alamma Iqbal his greatness. So he is different from other modernists in a sense that his heart is at the right place. Even when he's in his art he is Muslim. Even when he, his mind sometimes play, because of his education and because of the times anyway. So he is quite unlike Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, even though he is one of the followers of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, at least in these lectures. So what's happening here is we need to reflect on it a bit. So let's first look at the modernist humanist project. This project is to establish the sovereignty of man, human beings on this universe. And modern science, technology are the tool of this quest, and that has actually defined the nature of modern science and technology. And this is the common project of both forms of humanism, liberalism, Marxism, etc. So this is the modernist project. And basically, that's why we said that it's an Iblisi project. So it's making human beings into God. And capitalism is the civilization which this project establishes. And the purpose of capitalism is to overcome scarcity and create abundance, so there is no limit on human will and desire. And obviously it's a very successful project, but this project hasn't established human sovereignty. It has established the sovereignty of desires. And the sovereignty of these desires are sovereignty of desire in the sense that these desires become autonomous and they rule over humanity and human beings, as Quran said. So it is in actual fact, what rules and what becomes God is obviously not human being. Human being is not a God and can't be God, but desires, autonomous desires. So desires are the Lord of or God of this civilization or this. And obviously it is destroying human beings, human civilization, as well as our universe, as we can see. As Quran, says, ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس. And about desires, Quran says that, أفرأيت من اتخذ إلهه هواه. So have you seen those who have made desire into their God and Lord? So that's not some simile, it's actual fact, and it's one of the miracles of Quran that it actually predicts or projects the existence of or the possibility of civilization which is ruled by desires. Okay, so this is the modernist project. So this is modernism. Now, Muslim modernist project as is clearly enunciated or at least employed by Alamma Iqbal in this discussion is a project which says that in the Quranic, obviously not every Muslim modernist says that it's like that, but Iqbal is saying it in this way. The Quranic emphasis on the nature and the vastness of the universe carries in it, and these are Iqbal's words, the promise by God, obviously here. What is the promise? The promise of complete subjugation by man, and obviously to men, of this vast universe, or at least our universe, although in his poetry, Alamma Iqbal actually says the universe as well, because सितारों से आगे जहाँ और भी हैं, and all that. So this Muslim modernist project called for subjugation of nature to man as a promise of God. And this justification of modernity in religious terms is not new. Early modernity, in earlier justification of modernity, we see, for example, very important and influential religious justification of modernity of the modernist project of the sovereignty of man. For example, in Locke is a very influential Christian justification of modernity, or even Kant. And Kant actually recognized that this project is the project of human sovereignty, is the project of making a human into a god. And through this sovereignty, he actually shares a community with God, because God is a sovereign and humans are sovereign, potentially sovereign, and now they are actually becoming sovereign. So the whole project of modernity is to make human being co-worker of God, or co-worker of God, or companion of God in that sense. Okay, so Muslim modernist project is the project of that Muslim modernists say, at least those with religious bent, because there are Muslim modernists who are not religious. Their Islam is more like Judaism, in the sense that they are Muslim because they culturally belong to Islam, not that they believe Islam as a divine religion. But these Muslim modernists, Iqbal, they believe in Islam as a divine religion. So, but God has promised us a sovereignty, and sovereignty over nature. And that's why science and technology are actually Muslim inventions, as Iqbal would say. And not just so it is a promise, but with this promise comes a duty of human beings, duty of humanity, to carry out this project. And Iqbal says it here. So whose duty? That it's human beings' duty to reflect on the signs of God, that is nature, and he will interpret it as doing science and technology, as we'll see, and discover the means. That's the means is technology. Discover the means of realizing his conquest of nature, that is his lordship of nature. So Muslim project also believe in sovereignty of humanity and human beings, but sovereignty of human being as a viceroy of God, in a sense. And that's why the prophets have been sent. So people can, subjugate nature to their will as the viceroy of God, and this is the mission of God. And that Locke says that, and Muslim modernists say that. And even those who are not modernists, like anti-modernist in theory, but or their political thought was influenced by this project. For example, even our Imam Maulana Maududi, he justifies democracy on this basis and part of liberalism on this basis, that human beings are viceroy of God. And in that sense, Maulana Maududi is heavily influenced by Locke in a sense. Okay, so this is the Muslim modernist project. Now, what is the project of Islam, and what is the Quranic project, and what's the Abrahamic project as against these two projects? The Quranic project, on the other hand, the message of the prophets and the messengers, which has been misinterpreted by modernist Muslim and Christians, including Alamma Iqbal here, is totally at loggerheads with this idea. In fact, Islam would call the bearer of this project Hizb Shaitan. So the Quranic or Islamic project is to reflect on the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reflect on the universe and nature and changes in nature, in order to realize the immense powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, after this realization, subject your will, His will, to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what Islam is. And to realize that this our life in this universe is transitory, as a test, whether we obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandment or are persuaded by shaitan to obey his desires and his whims. And the purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's so worship is totally the direct opposite of sovereignty. Worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the exact opposite of the modernist and Muslim modernist project of establishing human sovereignty. And Quran doesn't tell us to conquer nature or subjugate nature to our will. No, saying that Quran actually says that you can't do that. It's only by mercy of Allah and His in'am, or His bounty on you, that He has subjugated part of nature to you through His will. It's not we who subjugate it, but Allah has subjugated it, and that's why we can actually use it or misuse it. So the nature and technology is given us, so we use it as a trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to sustain our life here, whose purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will see who uses them and who misuses them, as Quran says is again and again and again. So these are three different projects. Two of them are linked to, and they are opposed to the Islamic project, the project of the prophets and the messengers, which is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's go back to the text and finish it off for today. The strange thing is that even without questioning Alamma Iqbal's interpretation of the hadith here, what he is inferring from that, it doesn't follow at all, for example. Because the hadith said, Prophet said, don't vilify, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't vilify time, for time is God. And this is Imam Ahmad's, this version is in Imam Ahmad's Musnad. He said, La tasubbu dahra fa inna Allah huwa dahr. I don't know about the sanad of this hadith, but the meaning of it is correct, because, similar sort of words occur in Sahih Bukhari, and we'll get to that inshallah in the next. We'll look at this hadith in the next session inshallah. But here I want to finish it off by saying that none of what Iqbal is saying here follows from even his own interpretation of this hadith and these Quranic verses. This is why the Prophet said, don't vilify time, for time is God. And the Prophet said, don't vilify ad-dahr, and ad-dahr is time. Okay. And this immensity of time and space carries in it the promise of complete subjugation by man. How does immensity of time and space carries with it promise of a complete subjugation by man is beyond me, and whose duty it is to reflect on the sign of God. Yes, it is his duty, but that in order to realize the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to discover the means of realizing his conquest of nature as an actual fact, because that's what Iblis told Imam Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, father. This is Iblisi project, conquest of nature, as I. So we'll stop here and we'll continue from here. Next time we'll look at the hadith, actual hadith, and what it actually means, and then we'll move on inshallah.